What if the next Queen of England wasn't born to be one? And what if the king himself chose her, knowing it would shatter centuries of royal tradition? Now imagine this. It's a quiet morning inside Balmoral Castle. Rain taps against the century-old windows. A single room is lit, only one. Inside, King Charles III sits slumped in a worn armchair, his face gaunt, his hands trembling. Across from him, Princess Anne stands still, holding a sealed document with the royal crest. Her expression? Stoic. Unreadable. But her eyes, they say everything. That was the moment the crown changed hands. But how did we get here? This isn't just a story about illness. It's a story about betrayal, loyalty, and legacy. About a man facing his own mortality and refusing to leave the throne in the hands of someone he no longer trusts. A monarch whose cancer diagnosis triggered not just fear, but clarity. And in that clarity, a decision so bold, so controversial, it may just redefine the very future of the British monarchy. Because yes, King Charles is sick. Gravely. What Buckingham Palace described as routine medical concerns is, according to high-level insiders, something far more serious. A rare and aggressive form of cancer, unresponsive to standard treatment. The king, aged 77, has reportedly deteriorated far faster than anyone predicted. And now, behind palace walls, the question is no longer if a transition will happen, but who will ascend. And that's where things get explosive. You see, the expected successor, Prince William, hasn't taken the crown. Not yet. And Queen Camilla? According to palace aides, Charles has intentionally shut her out of the decision-making process. Sources close to the family say he doesn't trust her influence, and what began as quiet skepticism has evolved into open distrust. Which brings us to the woman at the center of the storm, Princess Anne. The Princess Royal. The hardest-working royal. The one who never sought the spotlight, yet spent decades quietly keeping the firm together. She's not glamorous. She's not controversial. But she is unflinchingly loyal. And in Charles's hour of desperation, that loyalty was the only thing he believed he could count on. Could Princess Anne become queen? That's not just a provocative question. It's a constitutional powder keg. Because in theory, no, and was never in the line of succession after William's children were born. The crown doesn't traditionally skip over the next in line. But the monarchy isn't just about legal succession. It's about perception, stability, survival. And if Charles believes Camilla cannot unite the realm, or that William isn't ready, then handing the crown to Anne, even temporarily, might be the only move that makes sense. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And yes, sources say that's exactly what he's done. This story matters now, right now, because the decision has already been made. While the public sees garden parties, red carpets, and PR smiles, behind closed doors the monarchy is bracing for a seismic shift. Secret meetings, handwritten letters, a whispered vow between siblings. This isn't the first time the royal family has faced a constitutional crisis, but it may be the first time one is playing out completely in the shadows. Consider this. Multiple royal courtiers have confirmed that Anne was summoned to a late-night meeting at Balmoral with only the king, his physician, and his private secretary present. No press, no aides, not even Camilla. What happened in that room was so serious that one member left in tears. That person wasn't Anne. What could possibly be so urgent, so secret, that it warranted bypassing the Queen Consort and the Prince of Wales? We'll get there. And when we do, you'll see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. But first, let's rewind. Because to understand how this all unfolded, we need to go back to the moment Charles received his diagnosis, to the first time he hesitated before stepping out onto the royal balcony, to the whispers of Camilla's growing influence, and the moments when Charles quietly pushed her away, and to that pivotal decision when he turned not to his wife, not to his son, but to his sister. Some will say it's unprecedented. Others will call it a betrayal. But in the end, it may just be the boldest act of love Charles has ever made, for his country, not his crown. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. This transition, if true, has already begun. And the palace? They're scrambling to keep it quiet. One senior royal aide allegedly told a trusted journalist, "The handover is in motion. The people just haven't been told yet." Let that sink in. The next monarch may already be operating from within the shadows. And queen in waiting? Or queen in secret? There's more. Oh, there's so much more. Because as Charles's health declines, the fractures within the family are widening. William, caught between loyalty to his father and readiness to lead. Camilla, fighting what some call her greatest fear, being sidelined in the final chapter. And Harry, rumored to be fuming in Montecito, excluded from every decision and allegedly planning his own response. This isn't just a change in leadership. It's a royal reckoning. And at the heart of it is a monarch quietly preparing his sister for the role no one expected her to fill. Why did Charles bypass Camilla? What exactly happened during that secret Balmoral meeting? And most importantly, what does it mean for the future of the monarchy? You're about to find out. But be warned, once we open this door, there's no going back. Because the moment Charles passed that sealed envelope to, and he didn't just change royal history. He shattered it. And what happens next? Well, that's the part no one saw coming. What do you do when your body begins to betray you, and you're wearing a crown? King Charles III was never supposed to rule for long. That was the whispered expectation, wasn't it? For decades, he stood in the wings, watching, waiting, serving. Always the Prince of Wales. Always the heir. And when Queen Elizabeth II passed in 2022, the crown finally landed on his head. But not as a young man, as a king in his twilight years. Now imagine the weight of it. Years of preparation, a lifetime of duty. And just when you begin, just when the nation starts adjusting to a new monarch, your body delivers the cruelest betrayal. Cancer. It wasn't supposed to be public. It wasn't even supposed to be serious, at first. A routine checkup, the palace said. Precautionary tests. But insiders knew something was wrong before the public did. It started with whispers among palace staff. Sudden cancellations. Charles growing visibly thinner. Pale. Withdrawn. Then, a missed meeting with the Prime Minister. Then, an unexplained absence from the Commonwealth Day service. A cornerstone in the royal calendar. Then silence. But behind the scenes? Absolute chaos. According to a senior courtier, the moment Charles's test results came back, there was an emergency conference call between his private physician, his head of household, and the Lord Chamberlain. The language used wasn't vague. It wasn't hopeful. It was clinical, brutal, aggressive, and advanced. How advanced? Sources say it was a form of blood cancer, rare, fast-moving, and difficult to treat in someone Charles's age. But the palace wouldn't confirm that. Officially, it was just a cancer diagnosis, conveniently unspecified. But let's ask the real question. Why hide the details? Is it about privacy or power? Think about it. Monarchs throughout history have hidden their ailments. Elizabeth I wore makeup to cover her fading complexion. George VI kept his lung cancer a secret until his death. The monarchy depends on the image of strength, even when the reality is anything but. But Charles? He was never one for illusion. One source close to the king claimed he broke down in front of and after hearing the news. It's too soon, he reportedly said. I haven't finished what I started. And yet, his first concern wasn't the illness. It was the crown. Here's where it gets intense. Within 48 hours of his diagnosis, Charles began altering his schedule, not just reducing engagements, but reassigning key responsibilities. Papers normally reserved for his review, redirected to other royals. Briefings meant for his eyes only, now going to his sister. And then came the most curious move of all, an unscheduled, last-minute trip to Balmoral. No press coverage, no explanation. Just Charles, a small medical team, and a skeleton staff. Why Balmoral? Because that's where royals go when something big is about to happen, or when something is happening. Now let's pause for a moment and think. Why would a reigning monarch, only a few years into his reign, retreat to Scotland in the middle of his treatment? Why not stay in London, surrounded by the full weight of the monarchy's machinery? Unless, of course, he didn't want anyone to see what was really going on. Multiple insiders say Charles began treatment in secret. Some say it was chemotherapy. Others suggest a more experimental regime. What they all agree on, however, is this: it wasn't working fast enough. That's when everything shifted. At first, the deterioration was subtle. Slight hesitation when walking, a visible wince during the changing of the guard, an unusually brief reception with diplomats. But soon, it became impossible to hide. His hand trembled during a speech at Windsor. He missed the state opening of Parliament, a duty he swore never to delegate unless absolutely necessary. And then, he stopped smiling in public. It sounds small, doesn't it? But if you know Charles, you know that forced smile was his trademark. His way of signaling to the public, I'm fine. I'm here. I'm reigning. When that smile disappeared, so did the illusion. One aide later admitted, we knew he was losing strength, but we didn't know how much he was losing trust. Trust. That's where the story takes a darker turn. Because Charles wasn't just battling cancer. He was questioning the people around him, especially Camilla. According to one source inside Clarence House, Charles began limiting the Queen Consort's access to his medical briefings. He allegedly instructed his physician to share updates with and directly. Let that sink in. Not William, not the Prime Minister. His sister, Princess Anne, who had never wanted to reign, who had never even discussed succession openly. And yet, she became his confidant, his proxy, his shadow. Why? Because Charles feared he wouldn't recover. And worse, he feared what would happen if he didn't. This is the moment the monarchy turned. Privately, Charles began drafting letters. Not official ones. Not declarations. Personal letters. To William. To Anne. To Camilla. And, according to a source with knowledge of the matter, to the Archbishop of Canterbury. What was in those letters? That remains a mystery. But one fact has emerged from multiple sources. He wrote a separate letter to Anne. And in it, he outlined a scenario where she would act as his regent, possibly even as his successor if William declined. That's constitutional dynamite. Could it happen? Technically, no. But remember, Charles's own mother tweaked the rules more than once during her reign. Monarchs can issue letters patent to reshape titles, duties, even lines of precedence. And Charles had the authority, while conscious and reigning, to put certain mechanisms in place before a crisis turned catastrophic. That's why this isn't just a health story. It's a succession story. It's a survival story. And it's playing out under the radar. Every step orchestrated to avoid panic. But the signs are there. If you know where to look. Let's talk about the press. Have you noticed the sudden shift in coverage? Less focus on Charles's reign. More on Anne's engagements. Her visibility has skyrocketed. She's been standing in for the king at ceremonial events, hosting foreign dignitaries, even reviewing military units, a role normally reserved for the monarch or the heir. Coincidence? Or preparation? And here's the kicker. At a recent event at St. James's Palace, a staffer overheard a foreign ambassador greet, and with the words, Your Royal Highness, or should I say, Your Majesty? The room fell silent and laughed it off. But Charles didn't. He reportedly looked down, clenched his jaw, and changed the subject. That reaction? It wasn't anger. It was resignation. And now, as his condition quietly worsens, we are approaching the point of no return. Because there's a moment every monarch faces in the shadow of death. A moment where legacy outweighs protocol, where loyalty outranks tradition, and where the future of the crown depends not on rules, but on trust. Charles had to ask himself one devastating question. If I can no longer reign, who can protect this institution better than me? His answer wasn't Camilla. It wasn't even William. It was Anne. And now, that answer is reshaping everything we thought we knew about the monarchy's future. But what exactly happened inside Balmoral during that fateful week? Why was William absent? Why was Camilla cut off? And why did Anne walk out of that castle holding a sealed red folder, with the Queen's cipher, not the King's? Those questions lead us into the next chapter. Because the illness was only the beginning. The betrayal was still to come. She waited half a lifetime to be queen. So where was she when it mattered most? Let's rewind for a moment. King Charles, freshly diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, quietly retreats to Balmoral. Royal engagements are slashed. Public appearances evaporate. Key responsibilities start drifting, subtly but unmistakably, toward his sister, and the crown, at least operationally, is beginning to shift. But amidst this critical moment, when Britain's monarch needs support, loyalty, strength, one person is conspicuously absent. Queen Camilla. Where was she? Better yet, why was she? This is the question no one in the press dares to ask directly. But behind palace doors, aides, secretaries, and insiders are all whispering the same thing. She was missing in action. Now, Before the defenders of the crown rushed to her side, let's make something clear. Camilla has been, for years now, a steady presence beside Charles. She weathered decades of public backlash. She learned how to speak the royal language. She smiled through frosty receptions, walked behind closed doors with heads of state, and built strong relationships with the press. In short, she did the work. But when Charles's health took a turn, so did her position. Let's take a closer look. According to senior staffers at Clarence House, the first signs of tension between Charles and Camilla didn't appear after the diagnosis. They started before. Subtle disagreements over how public their schedule should be. Charles, wanting to slow down. Camilla, pushing to keep up appearances. One insider described a private conversation between the couple, overheard through a cracked doorway. "If we start canceling now," she reportedly said, "they'll smell blood." Charles's reply? "Let them. They'll find out eventually." That line, cold, resigned, chilling, wasn't just about the press. It was about Camilla. In the weeks that followed, royal observers noticed something strange. Camilla began attending solo events. Charles was often absent, citing fatigue or routine treatment. But what wasn't being explained was why Camilla was also increasingly cut out of briefings, particularly the medical ones. One palace aide said it bluntly. "The king doesn't want her making succession decisions." Let's stop right there. Read that again. The king doesn't want his queen involved in succession decisions. If that's not a royal red flag, what is? We've seen it before in history. When monarchs begin shielding sensitive information from their consorts, it usually signals more than illness. It signals paranoia, distrust, and sometimes regret. And it gets worse. At the height of Charles's decline, during what insiders now call the Balmoral lockdown, Camilla was spotted, not at Balmoral, but at Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire. Multiple photos surfaced. One showing her walking alone, another showing her riding a horse on the grounds. Not one image showed her with Charles. No hand-holding, no tearful bedside vigil, no symbolic show of strength, just distance. Now, some say this was by design. That Camilla chose to retreat out of respect for Charles's privacy, that she was giving him space to process, to plan. But others aren't so charitable. According to a well-placed courtier, the truth is more brutal. Camilla was asked, told, not to come. Why? Because Charles was no longer confiding in her. He was confiding in someone else. And that shift didn't happen overnight, but it solidified fast. In one particularly revealing incident, Charles's private secretary mistakenly sent Camilla's office a red folder marked SOE, eyes only. Inside, briefing notes on sovereign succession logistics, preparations for an emergency regency, legal pathways through the Privy Council, contingency scripts for the Archbishop of Canterbury. When Camilla's office called to clarify if she was meant to receive it, they were told no. The folder was meant for Anne. That's when the walls started closing in. Let's talk optics. Because Camilla has always understood image. She knew she'd never be loved the way Diana was. But she carved out her own identity, a wry, witty, behind-the-scenes force. So when she began disappearing from royal events without explanation, the public noticed. The media speculated gently. Fatigue, private time, focusing on family. But inside, the truth was stark. She was being quietly sidelined. One aide described the shift as surgical. Another said, she wasn't excluded from everything, just the important things. That's perhaps the cruelest cut of all. She remained queen consort in name, attended flower shows, cut ribbons, hosted garden parties. But the real crown, the weight of succession, the knowledge of what comes next, was being hoarded by Charles and Anne. And she knew it. We're told there were two major confrontations. The first happened at Sandringham. Camilla reportedly drove up for an unannounced visit, hoping to see Charles privately. According to someone stationed at the estate that week, she was kept waiting 3 hours before being allowed to enter. When she finally saw the king, witnesses say the shouting was audible through the thick oak walls. "What am I?" she allegedly screamed. "Your wife or a placeholder?" Charles didn't shout back. He just said, "This is bigger than both of us." The second confrontation came weeks later, this time at Clarence House. By then, the cracks were deep. Charles had stopped referring to her in staff memos. Her name was quietly removed from official correspondence drafts. One staff member noticed she was seated 2 chairs further away at a private luncheon. When she confronted Charles again, he reportedly offered her a cold compromise. "You will always be queen consort, but not queen regent." Translation: "You'll stand by my side, but you'll never rule." That's the moment, insiders say, Camilla broke. She allegedly left the house in tears, refusing royal transport, and spent the next 3 nights at Ray Mill House without any public engagement. 3 days later, Princess and hosted the Duke of Edinburgh's awards ceremony in Charles's place. Camilla was nowhere to be seen. Let's pause. Let's ask ourselves, what does it mean when the queen consort is no longer present during major state moments? What does it mean when the king no longer trusts his own wife to be his voice? And what does it mean when his sister is handed the red box instead? You see, this isn't just a family drama. This is a royal chessboard. And Camilla? She was being maneuvered off the board, one quiet, calculated step at a time. Now, to be fair, some insiders say Camilla fought back. They say she attempted to rally support from certain courtiers, that she tried to bring William into the fold, that she asked, begged, even, for an audience with the archbishop to plead her case. But every door she knocked on remained shut. Why? Because Charles had already made his choice. His trust lay with Anne. His future, if not lived, would be led by her. And Camilla? She was left behind, a shadow in a palace full of ghosts. But here's where the story sharpens into something even colder. Because in the middle of this unraveling, Camilla received a message. A simple, handwritten note slipped under her door. 5 words. He chose her, not you. No signature. But everyone close to the palace knows who wrote it. Princess, and never says more than she needs to. And now she'd said enough. But what happened next? Well, that would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a king refuses to rule? It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. The sun had barely risen over London. Most of the country was still sleeping. But inside Buckingham Palace, an age-old ritual was already underway, one that dates back to the very foundation of the British monarchy, the sovereign's red box. Every morning, without fail, the reigning monarch receives a scarlet leather box filled with official government documents, state papers, briefings, decisions needing royal assent. It's the physical heartbeat of the crown, the pulse of continuity. No matter how sick, no matter how busy, no matter the personal crisis, the monarch opens the box, reviews, signs, leads. It's a sacred obligation. But on that Tuesday, King Charles didn't open it. He refused. Let that settle in. Because in over 70 years of royal protocol, Queen Elizabeth II never once turned it away. Even in the final weeks of her life, she reviewed state matters from Balmoral with trembling hands and steadfast resolve. But Charles? He looked at the box and turned away. According to an eyewitness, the footman who delivered it, Charles was sitting in his drawing room, wrapped in a tartan shawl. Pale, hollow-eyed. The footman placed the box gently on the side table, as always. Charles didn't even look at it. He just whispered, "Give it to," and that's it. No explanation. No apology. Just 5 words that shattered every expectation. Now, for those who don't understand the gravity, the red box is more than paper and leather. It's the monarch's living tether to the machinery of the state. A direct line between crown and government. The act of delegating that responsibility isn't just symbolic. It's seismic. And in that moment, something snapped. Let's trace what happened next. The red box, now officially undelivered, was rerouted, against protocol, to Princess Anne. Senior officials were reportedly caught completely off guard. One Downing Street source said, "We've never had a case where the king refuses the box." Even the prime minister was stunned and accepted the box quietly. No press, no photographers, no pageantry. But what she did with it, that's the bombshell. Rather than simply review the documents, she made a series of calls. To the Home Secretary, to the Archbishop of Canterbury, to a legal liaison in the Privy Council. In other words, she didn't just act as a substitute. She acted as sovereign. Unofficially, illegally, that's where things get murky. Because technically, Anne has no constitutional power to rule. She's not heir. She's not regent. She's not even close in the current line of succession, thanks to the birth of William's children and the rules of male primogeniture. So how did this happen? Why did no one stop it? Simple. Because the king told them not to. According to sources inside the palace, Charles issued a private memorandum, dated just one day before the incident, granting limited sovereign discretion to Princess, and in the event he was unfit to perform duties for a period of time exceeding 72 hours. Let that sink in. He anticipated the rejection of the red box. He planned it. He knew he was slipping, knew he would be incapacitated, knew that if the documents reached him, he might fumble, delay, or worse, approve something he didn't fully understand. And in his mind, there was only one person he trusted to step in. Not William, not Camilla, and let's talk about that memo. It wasn't public. It wasn't even officially filed in royal archives. It was handwritten, reportedly with trembling script, and sealed with the king's own ring. When aides tried to photograph it for documentation, it was intercepted and destroyed within hours. Only a few people saw it. Only one kept a copy, Princess Anne. Now here's where things start spiraling. Because once Anne held the red box, a domino effect began. Government departments started routing communications through her office. Foreign dignitaries were informed of temporary changes in representation. And in the shadows of all this, Camilla was left out completely. She wasn't consulted. She wasn't informed. She was, in the words of one official, irrelevant to the crisis unfolding. And William? Absent. Rumors suggest he was abroad at the time, possibly in Kenya or Canada on private matters. No official confirmation has been given. But his absence only fueled the speculation. Did he know his father was preparing to pass the reins? Was he consulted? Or was he, like Camilla, intentionally cut out? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Charles didn't trust either of them to carry the burden. He feared Camilla would politicize the process. He feared William wasn't ready. But Anne wouldn't seek glory, and would just do the job. And that's exactly what she did. For 3 full days, and handled state affairs with quiet authority. No statements, no fanfare, no deviation from procedure. She signed urgent documents, reviewed parliamentary summaries, even met with the Lord Chancellor in a confidential session at Windsor. But on day 4, everything changed again. Because Charles, against his doctor's advice, called for the red box. His strength had returned. Briefly, he was lucid, he was sharp, and he was furious. Not at Anne, at the system. At the fact that his quiet, controlled transfer of trust had already started spiraling into speculation. Leaks. Whispered questions from MPs. Who's really ruling right now? Is the king abdicating? Has Princess Anne been named regent? One morning paper ran the headline. The uncrowned queen? Charles slammed it down on the table. He summoned his staff. He made one statement. We're doing this my way. From now on, nothing goes to Anne. Nothing. But it was too late. Because power, once given, even temporarily, is almost impossible to contain. In just those few days, Anne had proven her capability, and others had noticed. Senior MPs, military generals, Commonwealth leaders, they saw something they hadn't expected. Continuity, strength, competence, and quietly, behind closed doors, they began to ask, what if she's the better choice? Now think about that. The king's temporary lapse in strength had opened the door to the unthinkable. A challenge to the line of succession not from outside the family, but from within. And Charles? He realized he couldn't unring that bell. The box had been passed. Trust had been transferred. And Anne? She never asked for it. She never sought it. But she held it, and she excelled. That changes everything. Because when a monarch chooses not to rule, someone has to. And now that someone had tasted power, not in the throne room, but in the paperwork, not in public, but in practice, and that person was no longer willing to sit silently in the background. But what came next? What happened when Charles tried to reverse the decision? And why did one aide later whisper, the next red box might be sealed with a different cipher? That's the part no one expected. What happens when the one person who never asked for power becomes the only one trusted to wield it? For decades, Princess Anne existed in the background of the royal spotlight. Dutiful, tireless, unwavering. She wasn't flashy like Diana. She wasn't groomed like Charles. And she certainly wasn't eager for the headlines. To most of the public, she was simply the Princess Royal, the no-nonsense daughter of Queen Elizabeth II who showed up, shook hands, and left. But behind that steely gaze and horse-rider posture was something else entirely. Discipline, integrity, loyalty. And now, for the first time in modern royal history, the quiet workhorse was being treated like the warhorse. She wasn't just being asked to fill in. She was being asked, by the king himself, to take control. Not symbolically, strategically, permanently. Let's rewind just a bit. When Charles refused the red box and handed it to, and many assumed it was a stopgap, a temporary fix, something to plug the hole while the king rested. But what they didn't realize, what only a select few knew, was that this wasn't the first time and had been quietly prepared. For years, yes, years, she had been receiving high-level briefings, security reports, and emergency preparedness protocols. Most assumed it was standard practice for senior royals. It wasn't. According to one palace staffer, she was getting sovereign-level intelligence briefings. Not even William gets those unless he's acting as regent. Why? Because Charles had been watching, waiting, planning. He knew his reign would be short. He knew there would be chaos after Elizabeth. He knew the family was fractured. And above all else, he knew that in a monarchy on the brink of cultural irrelevance, stability would matter more than bloodlines or charisma. And was stability incarnate. Let's talk about her resume for a moment. Over 20,000 official engagements. Over 50 years of unbroken public service. Military credentials. International diplomacy. She is the patron or president of over 300 organizations. From Save the Children to St. John Ambulance. From the Royal Navy to equestrian federations. She doesn't do it for the press. She does it because it's the job. And when Charles needed someone who would treat the crown not as a symbol, but as a duty, he turned to the only person he believed would never exploit it. His sister. But this rise from the shadows wasn't just about competence. It was about contrast. Because while William was navigating a complex relationship with a recovering Kate, and Camilla was reportedly having breakdowns behind palace walls, and was working, unflinchingly, day in, day out, state visits, hospital tours, military inspections, garden parties, council briefings, she never missed a step, never flinched, never even hinted that something historic was happening beneath the surface. That silence, it was deafening. Let's walk through one pivotal moment. During a Commonwealth summit in late October, Princess Anne stood in for Charles to greet the Prime Minister of Canada. Cameras rolled. Reporters watched. A subtle bow, a handshake, a flash of diplomatic pleasantries. But one clip, just 12 seconds long, went viral. The Canadian PM said, "Her Majesty would be proud," and smiled and replied, "Let's hope so." Not His Majesty. Her. And people noticed. Social media lit up with hashtags like #QueenAnne and #TheRightRoyal. Even commentators who normally mocked royal traditions began to shift their tone. "She's the only one doing the job," one BBC anchor noted. And frankly, she's doing it better than anyone. But this quiet ascension wasn't just playing out in public. Inside the palace, staff started rearranging workflows. Instead of sending drafts to Clarence House first, memos went straight to Buckingham Park, Anne's private estate. Security protocols were updated. A secondary royal cipher was discreetly printed on documents sent to Anne's team. Some say it was just a backup measure. Others say it was preparation for something more. A full regency. Or something even more radical. An unprecedented bypass of the line of succession. But could that even happen? Legally, the answer is complicated. Constitutionally, the line of succession is clear: William, then his children. But Charles, if declared mentally or physically unfit, could trigger a regency. That role should fall to William. But if William refused? Or if the crown deemed and the more stabilizing presence during a crisis? The Privy Council, along with Parliament, could step in. It would be controversial. It would spark outrage. But it wouldn't be impossible. And if public sentiment began to shift in her favor, the establishment might not fight it. Remember, Queen Elizabeth's entire reign was shaped by the unexpected abdication of Edward VIII. Monarchy has never been as immovable as it seems. Now, Anne's ascension came with its own emotional cost. She never asked for this. She never wanted it. In fact, according to a former lady-in-waiting, Anne once said privately, "If I were a man, I'd have been king by now. But thank God I'm not. I'd rather be useful." Useful. That's the word that defines her. And now, Being useful meant possibly becoming the most powerful woman in Britain. But what about the rest of the family? What was their reaction to her rise? That's where the fractures deepened. William reportedly felt ambushed. Sources say he wasn't consulted before Charles handed in the red box. He didn't even know about the memo until after it had been delivered. Camilla? Devastated. Insiders claim she confronted Charles in tears, saying, "I waited for this. You promised me a crown." Anne's response? Nothing. No comment. No public rebuttal. Just silence. And that silence? It said everything. Because Anne's rise wasn't theatrical. It wasn't leaked or staged or messaged through PR. It was built, brick by brick, through decades of quiet, thankless labor. And now, those bricks were forming the foundation of something historic. A monarchy, led by a woman who never wanted the throne, but might be the only one worthy of it. But the question remains, was this a temporary transfer of power? A short-term fix while Charles recovered? Or had the king, knowing his time was short, made a permanent decision? A decision to entrust the future of the crown, not to his son or his wife, but to his sister. And if so, was the world ready to accept her? Because what came next wasn't about whispers in the palace. It was about confrontation, an emergency meeting, a council of royals, and a decision that would test the monarchy like never before. And the only person not invited was Camilla. What if the next sovereign was chosen? Not in public ceremony, but in a hidden room with no cameras, no titles, and no queen? It was mid-autumn in Scotland. Balmoral Castle, usually serene and shrouded in the mists of royal tradition, was unusually tense. Guards at full alert, doors locked from the inside, curtains drawn tight. But not because of an external threat. No paparazzi, no protesters, no political turmoil. No, the threat was internal. Within the walls of this ancestral fortress, the very structure of the monarchy was being questioned and reimagined. Let's go back to the beginning of that week. King Charles had been flown to Balmoral discreetly, unannounced, unaccompanied by press, accompanied only by his medical team, private secretary, and an unusually restricted royal protection unit. No Camilla, no William, no Kate, but Princess Anne was already there. She had arrived 2 days prior. Under the guise of private equestrian business. It was a lie. Everyone at the castle knew it. What followed has now been dubbed by insiders as the Balmoral Council, a secret meeting that brought together the oldest, most powerful, and most discreet figures in the royal household. No cameras, no public schedule, and critically, no leak until now. Why Balmoral? Because that's where all major royal transitions begin or end. From Queen Victoria's last days to Elizabeth II's final farewell, Balmoral isn't just a holiday retreat. It's a fortress of privacy. And in those ancient stone halls, King Charles summoned 5 key individuals. Princess Anne, his sister and executor of his private estate. The Lord Chamberlain, head of the royal household. The Archbishop of Canterbury. The keeper of the privy purse, essentially the royal CFO. And his most trusted legal counsel. A man known simply as the King's Ghostwriter by insiders. They gathered in the castle's blue drawing room. Ornate fireplace, velvet chairs, a desk bearing the King's stationery, blank except for one red folder. And Charles, frail but lucid, opened with 5 words. It's time we faced reality. According to someone who reviewed notes from the meeting, taken by a royal courtier and immediately sealed, Charles expressed deep fears that the monarchy was entering an era of instability. That his diagnosis was not promising. That time was no longer a variable, it was a threat. And so, he said, we must prepare for a scenario where I can no longer perform my duties at all. But here's where the meeting took a turn. Because everyone in that room expected Charles to speak of Prince William. Expected him to lay out plans for his son's smooth transition into the throne. Instead, he shocked them all. He spoke of Anne. She has the grit, the discipline, and most of all, the trust. Gasps. Silence. Then the Archbishop reportedly said, Your Majesty, this is irregular. Charles replied, So is dying before your legacy is ready. From there, the conversation escalated into something almost Shakespearean. On one side, tradition, protocol, the line of succession. On the other, urgency, discretion, and a monarch who feared that following the rules would break the crown rather than preserve it. The Lord Chamberlain, a stern figure steeped in decades of ceremonial obedience, argued that installing and, even temporarily, would require letters patent, Privy Council approval, and parliamentary consultation. Charles said nothing for a long while, then opened a drawer and pulled out a letter, handwritten, dated weeks earlier, addressed to Anne. It read, in part, "Should I be declared unfit to reign, by health, mind, or judgment, I entrust you to safeguard the sovereignty of this institution. Not for your own glory, but for its survival." He had signed it not as Charles R., the formal royal cipher, but as simply, "Your brother, Charles." That line changed everything, because this wasn't just a political act. It was personal, a dying man's appeal to the only person he believed could carry his vision forward without twisting it. Now here's where it gets deeply secretive. The council drafted what insiders call a Regency Readiness Protocol. Not a formal Regency decree, but a plan that could be triggered in case Charles lost consciousness, became mentally unfit, or died suddenly. It listed Anne as the interim guardian of the sovereign seal. Never used before. Completely made up, but effective. It would allow her to temporarily oversee state papers, foreign policy briefings, and national emergencies without officially being crowned monarch. Think about that. And was being positioned not as queen, but as something far more powerful, a shadow monarch. And while the council debated legal limitations, and reportedly said just one thing, "I'll serve until I'm told not to." That was the moment she accepted, not the crown, but the burden. Now, this was the secret Charles wanted to protect from the public. But secrets don't stay secret forever, because one person walked in, uninvited, mid-meeting. Queen Camilla. According to 2 eyewitnesses, Camilla entered the blue drawing room without knocking. Her eyes were red. She looked straight at Charles, then turned to Anne. "What is this?" she demanded. "A coronation in hiding?" And didn't respond. Charles did. "It's a contingency, Camilla. Nothing more." But the tension in the room was nuclear. Camilla was not part of the council. She had not been consulted. And worse, she had been deliberately excluded. Why? Because Charles feared she'd try to override him, influence others, push for William or herself. He couldn't risk that, so he kept her in the dark. Camilla reportedly left the room in silence. But the damage was done. One aide described it as the moment the queen consort became just Camilla again. The council resumed. Final notes were signed. A vault was secured with copies of the letters. The only instruction Charles gave, no one must know. Not yet. And that's where the story should have ended. But it didn't. Because within 48 hours of that meeting, someone leaked. Not to the press. Not to Parliament. To Prince William. And what he did next would force Charles to face the one decision he had tried to delay. A final choice between tradition and trust. Because the heir had returned, and he wasn't happy. What would you do if you were born to be king, but your own father no longer believed in you? It was early evening at Kensington Palace when the call came through. Prince William was in the private gardens, pacing, earbuds in, speaking to one of his most trusted aides. The leaves were turning, the air crisp. Autumn in London had always been a symbolic time for the royals. Change in the wind, endings and beginnings. But nothing could have prepared him for the words whispered through that secure line. "Your father has named Anne as interim sovereign guardian." Silence. Followed by, "They met at Balmoral." It's already been put in motion. For a man raised on protocol, tradition, and the unshakable belief that one day he would sit on the throne, that moment was more than a shock. It was an existential crisis. Prince William, Duke of Cornwall, Prince of Wales, the heir to the British crown, had just been blindsided. Not by Parliament, not by the press, but by his own father. The news hit harder than any scandal, any tabloid headline, any family feud. This wasn't about Meghan, or Harry, or Andrew. This was about him. The king had bypassed him. But why? Let's rewind. In recent months, William had been juggling more than the public realized. Behind the polished appearances and carefully scripted engagements, his wife Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been recovering from a private health crisis. Insiders hint at a prolonged surgery followed by intense recuperation, all handled in near-total secrecy. William was devoted, protective, distracted. At the same time, his public role was increasing. More state visits, solo speeches, high-stakes meetings with government leaders. The workload was heavy, the expectations heavier. And through it all, he believed, was told, he was next in line. Until now, when the heir discovered he'd been skipped over, not by death or abdication, but by a living king, the fury was volcanic. According to a senior courtier, William locked himself in his private study for hours after the call, refused meals, canceled meetings. At one point, he was overheard muttering, "He doesn't trust me. My own father doesn't trust me." But was that true? Was Charles's decision a condemnation of his son, or something more complex? Let's examine the possibilities. On one hand, William was the logical choice. Heir apparent, beloved by the public, known globally, charismatic, modern, and increasingly seen as the future of the monarchy. His children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, represent the three-generation continuity the palace loves to flaunt. But on the other hand, Charles knew something the public didn't. He knew William was tired. He knew the pressure was mounting. He knew that, deep down, William wasn't ready for the throne now. Not yet. Not while caring for a recovering wife. Not while juggling young children. Not while the Sussex storm still loomed on the horizon. And maybe, just maybe, he knew something darker. That thrusting William into power during a health crisis would break him. Just like it nearly broke Charles when his own father was hospitalized decades ago. So instead, he chose Anne. But that doesn't mean William accepted it. Far from it. The day after the Balmoral Council, William boarded a private jet, destination, Scotland. He didn't notify the press. He didn't alert his father's team. He arrived at Balmoral without ceremony, without security fanfare, wearing a windbreaker and dark jeans. It was not a royal visit. It was personal, confrontational. Inside the stone walls of the castle, aides say Charles was resting, and met William at the gate. The conversation, according to those nearby, was frosty. William allegedly asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" Anne's reply, "Because you try to stop it." From there, tempers flared. William accused her of overstepping, and accused him of hiding behind duty. "He asked me, William," she said, reportedly. "He didn't order me. He asked. And I said yes because someone had to. That someone should have been me," William snapped. "But you weren't there," she answered. And that's the truth, isn't it? William wasn't there. Not at the Red Box handover. Not at the Balmoral Council. Not in the halls of decision-making. Whether by choice or circumstance, he had been absent. And absence has consequences, especially in the royal family. But here's where the story twists. Despite his fury, despite feeling betrayed, William didn't demand the role back. He didn't fight to be installed as regent. He didn't call Parliament or leak to the press. Instead, he hesitated. Why? Because deep down, part of him agreed with the move. One insider close to William said, he was devastated, but also relieved. He's not ready, and he knows it. Another claimed, he saw what the pressure did to his mother. He's terrified of that crown killing someone else he loves. But hesitation is deadly in politics. And in monarchy, it's an earthquake. Because while William was torn between duty and dread, and was already moving, leading, signing, stabilizing, the vacuum was being filled. And the longer William stayed frozen, the more permanent that replacement would become. Which led to the most important question of all. Would William reject the throne? If Charles passed, or formally stepped down, would William accept the crown, or would he yield? It sounds unthinkable, but royal history is full of unthinkables. Edward VIII abdicated for love. George VI reigned under constant fear. Elizabeth II rose at 25 with no preparation. Could William be the first to refuse? Not for scandal, but for strategy? He began consulting his inner circle, legal advisors, mental health professionals, even spiritual counselors. One source says he asked them the same question over and over. What if I said no? Would it break the monarchy or save it? That's the heart of the dilemma. To become king now, during a crisis, might derail his family, his stability, his future. But to step aside, that could either fracture the royal line or usher in the most competent leader the crown has seen in decades. His aunt, Anne. Reports suggest he's already drafted 2 speeches. One accepting the role, the other declining it. 2 futures, 2 Britons, and only one decision to make. The crown loomed. Heavy, complicated, unforgiving. Would he take it? or pass it to the sister his father already trusted more than anyone? That decision? He hasn't made it yet, but someone else already has. Because as William retreated to consider his choice, someone in Westminster began moving legal pieces behind his back. Someone who had no intention of letting the throne fall into Anne's lap permanently. A move that would spark the biggest constitutional standoff in modern royal history. And the person behind it? Camilla. How do you deliver a final message to the nation when you're not allowed to say what's really happening? The palace press office was unusually tense that morning. The BBC team arrived early, 5 cameras, 3 lighting rigs, and a carefully vetted list of questions. The room chosen for the interview was familiar, the white drawing room at Clarence House. A space drenched in history. Portraits of Queen Victoria on the wall. Charles's desk meticulously staged, photos of the family, a copy of Shakespeare's King Lear conspicuously placed in the background. Symbolism always. But behind the velvet drapes and royal formality, there was dread. King Charles III was about to give what many believed would be his final televised interview. The official line was simple, a year-in-review conversation, filmed to reassure the public amid mounting rumors of the king's health. No mention of cancer. No talk of succession. Just warmth, tradition, and continuity. At least, that was the plan. But the moment Charles walked into the room, it was clear things wouldn't go according to script. He looked tired, paler than usual, thinner. The tailoring on his Seville rose suit couldn't hide the weight loss. His hands trembled slightly when he poured tea for the host, and his voice, normally controlled and measured, sounded weathered. Fragile, even. The first few questions were softball. How has your first full year as monarch felt? What have you most enjoyed about stepping into your mother's shoes? What message would you like to share with the nation this winter? Charles responded with well-rehearsed lines. He smiled gently, talked about service, faith, and continuity. He praised Camilla for her loyal companionship and William for his steadfastness. He even made a gentle joke about being perhaps the most patient apprentice in royal history. But around the 38-minute mark, the interviewer veered. She leaned in and asked, "Your Majesty, the public has noticed your reduced appearances this year. There's been concern about your health. Would you like to say anything to reassure them?" A pause. Charles blinked. He looked down at his hands, resting on the arm of his chair, visibly trembling. Then he said, "The concern is touching, and I would simply say, each of us, as we age, must learn to pass certain things on. It's not weakness. It's wisdom." The room went dead silent. No follow-up question. No explanation. Just that quiet, cryptic line. Each of us must learn to pass certain things on. The camera kept rolling. He shifted in his seat, then added, almost as an afterthought, "It's not about age, really, or illness. It's about knowing when to let others lead, not just when you're gone, but while you're still here to guide them." That was the moment. That was the sentence that told insiders everything they needed to know. He wasn't just speaking hypothetically. He was saying goodbye. Now, the interview continued for another 10 minutes. More pleasantries. More gestures toward stability. But the tone had changed. The smile never quite returned to his face. He seemed resigned. When the final question came, "What gives you hope for the future?" he answered without hesitation, "My sister." That line was cut from the broadcast. Yes, cut. Because according to the BBC's own editorial team, the palace requested minor edits for tone and balance. Those edits? They included trimming down redundant references and personal sentiments not aligned with official messaging. Translation: remove the Queen and foreshadowing. But the damage was already done. The BBC staff had heard it live. One audio technician leaked the raw footage to a senior editor, who described it later as the most unfiltered we've ever seen Charles. Not defiant, not regal, just real. Like a man who knew he had days, not decades, left to shape the institution he inherited. And here's where things get eerie. That raw footage? It's locked away. Only a handful of people have seen it. But those who have, say there's a moment, just after Charles mentions Anne, where he looks directly into the camera, unscripted, and says, "The crown is not a possession. It's a responsibility, and I trust her with it." Her. He didn't say Camilla. He didn't say William. He said her, and everyone in the room knew exactly who he meant. After the interview ended, Charles reportedly requested the raw footage be shown to him privately. Alone. He watched the entire thing, start to finish. Then reportedly said, "They won't understand now. But one day they will." That footage has not been seen publicly since. But the BBC is said to have stored it under a file name that remains classified. One anonymous source revealed the internal nickname for it, the real coronation. But if Charles believed that moment would be the soft launch of a new era, he was mistaken. Because less than 48 hours later, Camilla confronted the palace press office. She had seen the transcript, had been told what was cut, and she was livid. He named her? On camera? She reportedly shouted. When the press aide tried to calm her down, she demanded, "Release the uncut version. If he's passing the crown, let the world see it. I'm not going to be erased." But the palace refused. And Camilla? She stormed out of Clarence House, not to Ray Mill House this time, but to a private legal consultation in Mayfair. What happened in that meeting would trigger a legal inquiry inside Parliament, challenge centuries of royal succession law, and place Princess and in the crosshairs of a constitutional crisis. Because Charles may have whispered his final wishes on camera, but Camilla was preparing to shout hers through a lawyer, and she wasn't going down without a fight. She waited half a lifetime to be queen, so where was she when it mattered most? Let's rewind for a moment. King Charles, freshly diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, quietly retreats to Balmoral. Royal engagements are slashed. Public appearances evaporate. Key responsibilities start drifting, subtly but unmistakably, toward his sister, and the crown, at least operationally, is beginning to shift. But amidst this critical moment, when Britain's monarch needs support, loyalty, strength, one person is conspicuously absent. Queen Camilla. Where was she? Better yet, why was she? This is the question no one in the press dares to ask directly. But behind palace doors, aides, secretaries, and insiders are all whispering the same thing. She was missing in action. Now, before the defenders of the crown rush to her side, let's make something clear. Camilla has been, for years now, a steady presence beside Charles. She weathered decades of public backlash. She learned how to speak the royal language. She smiled through frosty receptions, walked behind closed doors with heads of state, and built strong relationships with the press. In short, she did the work. But when Charles's health took a turn, so did her position. Let's take a closer look. According to senior staffers at Clarence House, the first signs of tension between Charles and Camilla didn't appear after the diagnosis. They started before. Subtle disagreements over how public their schedule should be. Charles, wanting to slow down. Camilla, pushing to keep up appearances. One insider described a private conversation between the couple, overheard through a cracked doorway. "If we start canceling now," she reportedly said, "they'll smell blood." Charles's reply? "Let them. They'll find out eventually." That line, cold, resigned, chilling, wasn't just about the press. It was about Camilla. In the weeks that followed, royal observers noticed something strange. Camilla began attending solo events. Charles was often absent, citing fatigue or routine treatment. But what wasn't being explained was why Camilla was also increasingly cut out of briefings, particularly the medical ones. One palace aide said it bluntly. "The king doesn't want her making succession decisions." Let's stop right there. Read that again. The king doesn't want his queen involved in succession decisions. If that's not a royal red flag, what is? We've seen it before in history. When monarchs begin shielding sensitive information from their consorts, it usually signals more than illness. It signals paranoia, distrust, and sometimes regret. And it gets worse. At the height of Charles's decline, during what insiders now call the Balmoral lockdown, Camilla was spotted, not at Balmoral, but at Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire. Multiple photos surfaced. One showing her walking alone, another showing her riding a horse on the grounds. Not one image showed her with Charles. No hand-holding, no tearful bedside vigil, no symbolic show of strength, just distance. Now, some say this was by design. That Camilla chose to retreat out of respect for Charles's privacy, that she was giving him space to process, to plan. But others aren't so charitable. According to a well-placed courtier, the truth is more brutal. Camilla was asked, told, not to come. Why? Because Charles was no longer confiding in her. He was confiding in someone else. And that shift didn't happen overnight, but it solidified fast. In one particularly revealing incident, Charles's private secretary mistakenly sent Camilla's office a red folder marked SOE, eyes only. Inside, briefing notes on sovereign succession logistics, preparations for an emergency regency, legal pathways through the Privy Council, contingency scripts for the Archbishop of Canterbury. When Camilla's office called to clarify if she was meant to receive it, they were told no. The folder was meant for Anne. That's when the walls started closing in. Let's talk optics. Because Camilla has always understood image. She knew she'd never be loved the way Diana was. But she carved out her own identity, a wry, witty, behind-the-scenes force. So when she began disappearing from royal events without explanation,